Close your eyes. Hear the lap of waves against teakwood. Smell salt air mingling with cinnamon bark. This is the sensory world of the Maritime Silk Road, where goods traveled so slowly they absorbed the essence of every port. Tonight, we're reconstructing history through scent, sound, and texture. No dense dates or dry treaties. Picture this. You're working the docks in ancient Tyre when a silhouette emerges from the morning haze. The ship's design is unfamiliar. Its sails stitched together differently. Its hull lines curved where yours are straight. Your hands slow as you coil rope, watching the crew's foreign gestures as they prepare to dock. This wasn't scheduled. No one told you to expect visitors. Coastal communities developed strict protocols for these moments. When an unknown vessel appeared, the first move was always defensive. Armed guards would position themselves visibly along the quay. Harbor masters sent runners to alert town officials. But alongside the tension, there was always curiosity. Imagine the dockworkers whispering bets about where this ship came from. Ceylon? India? Someplace no one had names for yet? Roman chroniclers wrote about Indian ships reaching Alexandria under Augustus's rule. The crews wore fabrics lighter than anything Mediterranean weavers produced. Their spices made market inspectors sneeze. Some accounts mention how sailors communicated by drawing maps in the sand when no interpreters were available. The arrival log from one Egyptian port notes, they detained such a crew for 3 days until a translator could be found. First contact followed patterns across trading cultures. Approaching ships signaled peaceful intent by furling sails halfway, a universal gesture, meaning, we come bearing goods, not weapons. Dock officials then boarded with a squad to record the ship's provenance. They checked for contraband or prohibited items, running hands through grain shipments, feeling for hidden jewels. Any crew refusing inspection risked having their cargo impounded. Language barriers got creative solutions. In Hormuz, merchants kept polyglot slaves who could haggle in 12 languages. Malacca's dockyards employed children as phrasebook translators. Kids picked up languages faster. Standardized gesture systems developed too. A clenched fist meant, I'll pay in silver, while touching one's earlobe signaled, throw in something extra. The most successful traders mastered these silent negotiations. Cargo inspection was methodical. Customs officials used bronze rods to probe amphorae, checking for false bottoms hiding gems. They knew cinnamon bark should flake a certain way if fresh, that bulk pepper shouldn't rattle too much, a sign of stale, shriveled berries. One Byzantine manual advised tasting random salt crystals in pure batches dissolved slower on the tongue. Ships passing inspection got lead seals stamped onto their cargo ropes. Broken seals meant tampering. Then came the moment everyone waited for, the unpacking. Sailors rolled out Gujarati cotton, so fine you could see your hand through it. Jars cracked open to release the narcotic scent of Sumatran camphor. Occasionally, something truly foreign appeared, like the African parrot that stunned a Corinthian marketplace by reciting Phoenician curse words. Bulk goods changed local economies overnight. A single pepper ship's arrival could have prices in Alexandria's markets before noon. These encounters shaped more than commerce. A Tamil poem describes sailors demonstrating coconut oil to skeptical Greeks, showing how it solidified in cool weather but melted when rubbed on skin. Ship carpenters traded techniques. Mediterranean builders adopted the stitched hole method after seeing how it flexed better in monsoons. Even religious practices traveled this way. Dockside shrines to foreign gods often gained local devotees. After sailors explained their rituals, by sunset, the strange ship would be just another silhouette among hundreds. Crews bunked in portside hostels, their exotic accents blending into the harbor's nightly cacophony. Tomorrow would bring haggling, repairs, maybe recruitment offers for adventurous locals. But for now, the dock workers headed home with stories to share and new ideas about how wide the world really was. The rhythm of harbor life absorbed these disruptions seamlessly. Come dawn, the real work began unloading, registering, and moving all that cargo inland. But that's a soundscape for another chapter. Before sunrise, the docks woke with wooden groans. Hulls creaked against hemp bumpers as night watchmen lit their last oil lamps. The first sounds weren't human ropes stretched by changing tides made low twanging noises, like a poorly tuned lute. Then came the scrape of anchor chains being hauled up, the unmistakable sound of a ship preparing to dock. Different vessels announced themselves differently. A Phoenician galley made a rhythmic splashing from its oars, while an Indian cargo ship's bamboo sails flapped like laundry in wind. Chinese junks arrived silently, their matting absorbed sound. Dock workers learned to distinguish them by ear. Before seeing them, you'd hear someone mutter Malacca traders, just from the particular clatter of their rigging. Unloading began the moment ships tied up. Stevedores worked barefoot for better grip on damp planks, their calloused feet slapping against wood. They chanted in time to coordinate lifts, a half-sung language of heave and steady that crossed cultures. Heavy amphorae landed on pallets with a ceramic clunk, while loose peppercorns rattled like hail when poured into sacks. The harbor master's brass bell punctuated this chaos, marking when new ships could approach. Communication happened through noise and gesture. A dropped crate meant stop work. Everyone froze until the foreman's all-clear whistle. Sailors banged mallets against hulls to signal distress. The warehouse district developed its own sound codes. 3 drum beats meant incoming spices, while a gong signaled precious metals. Even animals participated. Trained cranes squawked when detecting contraband in grain shipments. The harbor master controlled this symphony. His platform gave sightlines across all docking areas. Assistants with speaking trumpets amplified his orders over the din. He kept a wax tablet ledger, using a stylus to scratch notes about which ships paid anchorage fees. His main tool was a clepsydra water clock that timed each unloading slot. When its float sank too low, he'd pound the deck with his staff. Cargo handling had strict rules. Workers formed human chains to pass goods ashore, eliminating unnecessary movement. They knew unglazed pottery should clink, but not crack when tapped together. Linen inspectors shook bolts of fabric near their ears. Good quality cloth made a soft whoosh, while cheap reweaves produced a dull thud. Mislabeled crates got dragged to a paving stone marked with red ochre, where they were opened under guard. The busiest hours sounded like continuous thunder. Hundreds of hammers, striking bales into compact shapes, created a staccato backdrop. Donkeys added hee-hawing complaints as they turned treadmills to operate cranes. Sailors mending nets whistled through their teeth to keep time. By mid-morning, the composite noise could carry 3 miles inland urban dwellers set their routines. By this acoustic clock, primitive soundproofing existed. Warehouse doors were layered with seaweed stuffing to mute the ching of silver coins being counted. Rice shipments got unloaded on straw mats to dampen spill noises. Night crews stuffed, rags between squeaky pulley wheels. But some sounds were encouraged auctioneers, prized their ability to shout over the cacophony, believing louder voices commanded higher prices. What survives in records reveals trade volumes. Alexandria's logs note the constant din during peak season, when ships waded 6 deep offshore. A Venetian account describes dock workers stuffing wool in their ears during spice fleet arrivals. Archaeologists found Chinese porcelain shards near old harbors. Their density corresponds to how often crews evidently dropped pieces in the clamor. The noise also reflected danger. A sudden silence meant pirates might be approaching. Harbor. Guards listened for the wrong rhythms and unnatural pause between oar strokes, or deck boards creaking under too many footsteps. When they suspected trouble, they blew conch shells in specific patterns. Workers then hurried cargo to locked sheds, while armed men took positions behind bales of cotton. By late afternoon, the sounds muted. Ships heading out caught the evening breeze, their sails filling with audible pops. Winches ground slower as tired crews worked. Only the clank of anchor chains being released into the water marked departures. Soon, just the slosh of waves lapping against pilings remained, until the night watchman's footsteps began the cycle again. Transitioning from this auditory landscape, we find another sense coming to the fore, the pervasive smells that lingered longer than any noise. The spice merchant's nose worked harder than his ledger. In an age without expiration dates, every trade hinged on scent. You'd watch a buyer crumble dried ginger between thumb and forefinger, lift it to his face, and inhale like his life. Depended on it because his profits did. One bad batch could bankrupt a middleman. Cinnamon told its story through smell. Fresh bark released a warm, woody aroma with hints of citrus. It meant it was first-grade stuff from Ceylon. If it smelled flat or musty, it had probably been stored near damp cotton during the voyage. Smart merchants kept samples from each harvest year for comparison. They'd rub 2 sticks together to heat the oils, and sniff for that sharp, clean punch. Pepper was trickier. Good Malabar peppercorns should make you sneeze when poured from height into a bronze scale. But if the grains smelled like dust, they'd likely been mixed with juniper berries to add bulk. Arab traders had a trick. They'd drop a handful into vinegar. Pure pepper sank slowly, while adulterated blends left floating debris. Frankincense required a different approach. Buyers would scrape a thumbnail across the resin, then hold it near a candle. High-quality tears released a lemony pine scent that clung to clothes for hours. Inferior stuff from incorrect tree species smelled like burnt sugar. Some temples insisted on testing shipments by burning a piece during prayers. If the smoke didn't rise straight to the heavens, they rejected the lot. The stakes were absurdly high. In Rome's spice market, a pound of first-pressed saffron cost as much as a racehorse. One Persian caravan guide recounted wrapping peppercorns in lotus leaves, then sealing them in lead containers, not to preserve flavor, but to mask the scent from tax collectors. Ships carrying nutmeg often listed their cargo as mixed grains. To avoid pirates, seasoned traders developed specialized noses. A veteran could identify a spice's origin. Blindfolded Sumatran camphor had medicinal sharpness, while Borneo's version smelled sweeter. They detected water damage in cloves by rubbing them to check if the oil stains on paper spread evenly. When inspecting cardamom pods, they'd crack one open to see if the seeds stuck together, a sign of humidity exposure during transit. Storage methods betrayed desperation. Merchants packed cinnamon in tin-lined chests, buried ginger in barrels of rice, and wrapped vanilla pods in waxed cotton. None of it was foolproof. A Venetian account from 1382 documents a shipment where the pepper smelled more of sailors' quarters than Araby. That cargo sold at a 60% discount to a tavern owner who planned to boil it into cheap sausage. Fraud was rampant. Unscrupulous sellers weighted saffron threads with lead filings, knowing the metal's odor wouldn't overpower the spice's natural musk. Cumin got mixed with ground acorns, and experienced buyer could spot the difference by rubbing a pinch between palms. Real cumin oil left a lingering tingle, while the fake version just made your skin smell like tree bark. The human cost of this smell test economy was steep. Apprentice buyers trained for years, memorizing hundreds of scent profiles. Many developed chronic nosebleeds from constant exposure to spice dust. A Genoese guild manual warned against letting workers inspect more than 3 shipments per day, noting that overuse of the nostrils leads to errors of judgment. Some aging merchants resorted to sniffing horseradish paste between inspections to clear their nasal passages. Markets developed rituals around scent verification. In Calicut, cinnamon auctions required vendors to burn a small sample on a charcoal brazier. Crowds would press close to catch the first fragrant smoke. Antioch's spice quarter had designated sniffing alleys where buyers walked laps, with open sacks, letting breezes carry aromas. Cairo's inspectors used trained dogs to detect mold in shipments before humans risked inhaling potentially toxic spores. These practices left physical traces. Archaeologists find concentrated peppercorn residues near ancient docks, suggesting spots where merchants habitually spilled samples during inspections. A sunken ship off Crete contained a lead case with compartments for 21 spice varieties. Each section still bears microscopic plant oils that reveal what was stored there. The most telling find: a set of bronze smelling spoons with different bowl shapes designed for scooping powders versus whole spices. All this fuss over aroma wasn't just about luxury. In an era before refrigeration, spices preserved food and masked rot. Medieval physicians prescribed pepper for digestive issues and cinnamon for coughs. Wealthy households burned cloves to purify air during plagues. The scent wasn't just pleasant, it was often the difference between eating safely or risking. Dysentery. This obsessive attention to smell had lasting effects. Modern food science shows many ancient assessment methods were surprisingly accurate. The volatile compounds that give spices their aroma also indicate antimicrobial potency. When those 14th century merchants rejected weakly scented pepper, they were unknowingly filtering out batches with reduced preservative qualities. The human nose couldn't keep up forever. By the 1600s, chemical tests began replacing sensory checks. But walk through Istanbul's spice market today, and you'll still see old men evaluating sumac by rubbing it between their palms and inhaling deeply a 2,000-year-old quality control technique that outlived empires. Those slow boats carried more than cargo. They transported entire sensory landscapes. Next time you open a spice jar, try the ancient method. Crush a bit between your fingers, breathe in, and listen. That quiet whisper of aroma is the echo of 1,000 ships crossing uncharted seas. From the careful assessment of goods, we turn to the far riskier business of moving them. That last letter always sounded hopeful. Sailors wrote them the night before departure, usually with someone else's hand guiding theirs. You'd find these folded scraps in abandoned sea chests years later. The ink blurred from humidity, but the words still clear. Expect me when you see me. These weren't poetic turns of phrase, they were literal. A round trip from Alexandria to India took 18 months if the winds cooperated. Most didn't make it back. The numbers are brutal but simple. For every 10 men who left port, 3 wouldn't return. That wasn't catastrophe, that was expected. Ship owners factored it into costs. Families treated farewells like funerals. The smarter sailors paid scribes to write 2 versions of their will before sailing, one for drowning, one for dying of fever. Both got notarized. The sea didn't kill quickly. It usually started with the water. You drink from wooden casks that grew algae by week 2. Dysentery set in by month 3. By the time you hit the Indian coast, half the crew would be squatting over the rails at dawn. Some captains carried dried pomegranate peel to make diarrhea tea. It worked about 40% of the time. Storms got the dramatic stories, but weren't the main killers. Sailors feared calm patches more. When a ship drifted windless for weeks, dehydration did what waves couldn't. One Greek captain's log mentions rationing a cup of spoiled water per man daily until the weakest began seeing land where none existed. Cannibalism happened, but rarely most ships carried enough hardtack to outlast starvation. It just wasn't edible enough to keep you living well. Pirates at least gave you a fighting chance. Most attackers wanted cargo, not corpses. But they weren't above throwing crew overboard to lighten ships for escape. The smart pirates kept a sailor or 2 alive, someone who knew harbor approaches. A captured Phoenician sailor's contract, found in Crete, shows he served 3 pirate captains consecutively before finally making it home. Disease spread faster than news. Sick bays were just rope screens near the bilge. When plague hit, captains ordered infected men to sleep windward. That was the whole protocol. The Venetian Maritime Code required ships to carry one barber surgeon per 100 crew. His main tool? A leather pouch of leeches. One surviving surgeon's inventory lists saw, silk thread, and onion poultices as his entire medical kit. Sailors prepared like they were already dead. They sewed silver coins into their belts for Charon's fair. Many carried dead man's nails, iron, spikes blessed by priests to weigh their bodies down if drowned. Some Mediterranean crews tattooed their home ports on their wrists so corpses could be returned. The tattoos often included payment instructions for the ferrymen. Wives and mothers developed their own rituals. In Marseille, women burned lemon peels when ships were overdue. The scent was supposed to guide sailors home. Chinese merchants. Wives planted lotus in courtyard ponds, one blossom per voyage. If the flower died before the husband returned, she started mourning. Ephesus had professional mourners who'd wail at the docks every equinox for missing sailors. Port towns built. Odd memorials. Alexandria's lighthouse had names of lost sailors carved into its base. The more superstitious ports avoided tombstones. They believed naming the dead would attract their ghosts. Instead, they hung bronze bells in harbor temples. Each represented a ship that never returned. The caretaker rang them during storms to call the lost home. What's striking is how casually these losses were recorded. Carthaginian shipping logs list crew deaths between inventory counts. 20 cedar logs, 4 amphorae oil, 1 deckhand expired. The Silk Road's only complete crew roster was found in Samarkand. It notes 42 set out, 19 arrived, beside a cargo listing for jade and rhubarb. Modern archaeology confirms the scale. A sunken Roman ship off Sardinia had 20 skeleton 13, showed signs of healed fractures. These men had survived previous disasters only to die on a routine run. Another wreck near Cyprus contained a child's bones among the crew, likely a cabin boy who didn't make 15. The letters that did arrive home followed patterns. They avoided mentioning deaths until the end, like postscripts. One found in austere reads, "The pepper crop is good this year. We lost Matthias to fever yesterday." Children received vague promises. "Father will bring you a monkey next time." The luckier ones got lies. "The captain says we've passed the dangerous parts." Some cultures developed entire industries around the absence. Alexandrian scribes made steady money writing delayed return notices for widows to show creditors. Ephesian priests sold certificates of presumed death after 5 years missing. In Canton, families could hire professional grave tenders to maintain empty plots, just in case the sea ever gave its dead back. The saddest finds are the unsent letters. Archaeologists uncovered a bundle in an Anatolian shipwreck -38. Personal notes sealed in a waterproof tin. The scribe had died before dock. The ink dissolved when exposed to air, leaving only faint impressions on the wax lining. One phrase was legible: "Don't wait up." A few ports tried practical solutions. Rhodes operated a message buoy system. Ships dropped marked floats that coastal boats collected. About 1 in 3 made it. The Hanseatic League kept last letter registries where captains deposited farewell notes before dangerous routes. Less than half were ever claimed. This ever-present mortality reshaped the maritime culture. Sailors avoided learning each other's real names. It hurt less when someone disappeared. They developed superstitions about not completing sentences like, "when I return." Even naval contracts assumed short careers. A standard Phoenician agreement promised double pay, but only if you survived the full voyage. Perhaps the most telling artifact sits in an Athens museum. A child's wooden toy boat found in a sailor's grave. The father had carved it during his final illness aboard ship. The crew delivered it to his son 6 months after burying him at sea. It's just 4 inches long with crude sail scratches. On the bottom, carved in shaky letters, "Sorry, I couldn't come home." From these quiet personal tragedies, we turn to how sailors managed the machines that both endangered and sustained them. Imagine guiding a ship across open ocean without GPS, compass, or charts. Ancient navigators did it daily, using methods that would baffle modern sailors. Their tools weren't brass instruments, but observation skills refined over generations. They read the sea like we read street signs interpreting patterns invisible to untrained eyes. Polynesian wayfinders could detect islands beyond the horizon by knee movements. Standing balanced in a moving canoe, they felt subtle shifts in swell patterns through their legs. An experienced navigator could distinguish 5 separate wave trains intersecting, each alteration signaling nearby land. They trained apprentices by blindfolding them in rocking boats for months until they could draw accurate wave maps from memory. Birds served as living navigation instruments. Sailors watched for terns returning to shore at dusk their flight. Paths became arrows pointing toward land. The ancient Tamil text Periplus described ships carrying caged frigate birds. When crews suspected land was near, they'd release one. If it circled the ship, no land. If it flew straight, sailors adjusted. Course to follow. Smart captains kept birds hungry. They flew more urgently toward shore. Celestial navigation worked, but required clear skies. The best navigators could find direction using just 3 stars. Polaris in the north, Crux in the south, and Vega for latitude checks. Cloudy nights forced reliance on backup systems. Arab sailors used the sun's midday shadow for direction, but carried sunstone's chunks of Icelandic spar that polarized light to locate the sun through overcast skies. Mediterranean pilots memorized the color shift from deep to shallow water. Blue meant safety, green warned of reefs. Monsoon winds dictated everything. Indian Ocean traders planned entire years around seasonal wind reversals. April's southwest winds blew ships toward India. December's northeast winds brought them home. Miss the window by 2 weeks, and you might drift for months. Shipping contracts included clauses like, if monsoon fails, wages have after 60 days. One Roman merchant's diary complains about sitting becalmed so long his crew ate the cargo seals. Dead reckoning was guesswork with consequences. Sailors estimated speed by timing flotsam passing the hull. A counted-out chant of one Mississippi became the original knot. Measurement hence speed in nautical knots today. Errors accumulated fast. A 2% daily miscalculation over 60 days put you 120 miles off course enough to miss entire islands. Homer's Odyssey might just be the world's most famous dead reckoning failure. Latitude was manageable, but longitude nearly impossible without clocks. Navigators used simple tools like the camel, a wooden rectangle on a string held at teeth's length. Lining it up with the horizon and North Star gave approximate latitude. But east-west position remained a gamble. Ships often sailed north-south, first to correct latitude before turning east-west, adding weeks to voyages, but reducing chances of complete disaster. Collateral damage from navigational errors reshaped history. A Roman grain ship blown off course in 93 AD introduced Southeast Asian chickens to Madagascar. Chinese records tell of a merchant vessel missing Malacca. By 400 miles, they accidentally discovered Sumatra's pepper groves. The entire Molucca's spice trade might have begun when a storm-pushed junk landed there instead of Java. Failed navigation created as many trade routes as successful voyages. Wayfinding knowledge was guarded like state secrets. Venetian navigational. Schools made students swear blood oaths before teaching wave patterns. Arab pilots snapped wax tablets rather than risk rivals seeing their bearing calculations. When Portuguese sailors finally reached India, their biggest theft wasn't spices. It was kidnapping a Gujarati navigator to learn monsoon timings. The man later escaped by jumping ship near Oman. Animals often proved better guides than humans. Whales migrating along set paths became living sea lanes. Turtles swimming to nesting beaches led ships to undiscovered islands. Even jellyfish helped certain species only bloomed near coastal upwellings. One Greek captain's log notes following a pod of dolphins for 3 days straight until spotting land. Modern research confirms dolphins often escort ships toward shelter. Bays. Transition periods were deadly. The few weeks when monsoons shifted direction created unpredictable cross-currents. Ships that left port during transition faced weeks of tacking against contrary winds. Records from Alexandria's lighthouse list dozens of vessels lost during the turning month. Those who survived the wait could make fortunes. Being first to market with new spices meant selling at 300% markups. Landfall was often a surprise. Thick morning fog might lift to reveal cliffs when you expected a sandy beach. Night arrivals were especially dangerous. One wrong guess about shoreline angle meant wrecking. Ports maintained bonfire beacons, but resourceful captains lit their own decoy fires to lure rivals onto rocks. An entire industry of wreckers made livings salvaging cargo from ships, misled by false signals. The limitations shaped trade profoundly. No amount of profit could overcome seasonal windows. A pepper harvest might sit in Indian warehouses for 6 months, awaiting saleable winds. Ships carried triple crews, knowing many wouldn't survive one to sail out, one to wait through the reverse monsoon, one to sail home. The human cost of this temporal prison appears in Java's sailor graveyards, row after row of men who didn't live through the waiting season. This constant proximity to disaster birthed maritime insurance. Babylonian traders pioneered risk-sharing contracts where backers split voyage costs. If ships returned, profits were shared. If not, the loss was distributed. Premiums varied by navigator reputation. One excavated tablet lists rates. For Kish pilot, 20% cargo value. Egyptian pilot, 40%. Some things never change, and competence was expensive even then. From these calculated gambles with nature's forces, we turn to the equally fraught human dangers that awaited each laden vessel. Every trading vessel carried two kinds of protection: steel and signatures. The first meant armed guards pacing the decks. The second referred to letters from kings guaranteeing safe passage, though pirates rarely honored either. Ship captains knew the real cost of doing business wasn't the cargo's purchase price, but the blood and bribes required to deliver it intact. Piracy wasn't some occasional hazard. It was a fixed expense, like rigging or crew wages. In the Mediterranean, a standard merchant contract deducted 15% off the top for protection payments. These weren't insurance policies, but direct bribes to known pirate gangs. Sicilian vessels paid the Cilician Brotherhood a set rate per voyage. Refuse, and your ship would mysteriously catch fire in port. Pay up, and you'd get a lead token to nail to your mast. Any raiders seeing it would let you pass. The tactics were as varied as the predators. Off North Africa, pirates used decoy fishing boats to lure ships into shallow bays. Aden's raiders tied lanterns to goats along cliffs at night, fooling captains into steering toward false harbor lights. Chinese records describe river pirates who'd float downstream clinging to logs, boarding ships silently while crews slept. The most brutal operated near Malacca. They'd kill every 10th crew member during robberies to encourage prompt compliance next time. Harbor taxes were another form of sanctioned piracy. Customs agents wielded measuring rods like weapons. In Alexandria, officials calculated duties by dipping those rods into grain shipments. Whatever stuck to the grooves was declared spillage due for seizure. Venetian merchants complained of inspectors shaking spice sacks violently to create acceptable wastage. One recovered ledger from Piraeus shows a 40% tax on Cypriot copper, with an added wave damage assessment fee accounting for another 12%. The math was simple. The longer your cargo sat on the dock being inspected, the more vanished before reaching buyers. The economics of coercion shaped trade routes. Cinnamon from Ceylon typically changed hands 6 times before reaching Europe, not because of transportation needs, but due to layered extortion. Each middleman added their cut. Pepper prices in Rome included 10% to Malabar Coast Guards, to 15% to Hormuz Strait patrols, to 20% to Red Sea. Harbor facilitators, an undisclosed sum to the Alexandrian customs director's mistress by the time those peppercorns reached Gaul. They cost more per ounce than silver. Some goods became too expensive to move at all. A Byzantine merchant's memo lists Sogdian melons as unviable cargo. The bribes required to cross Sasanian Persia erased all profit. Pirate nests flourished in geography's blind spots. The Lipari Islands near Sicily hosted a thriving black market where stolen goods were resold to their original owners. Armenian traders reportedly bought back their own carpets there, 3 times in 1 year. The Malay archipelago's maze of inlets hid entire floating villages, specializing in fake harbor lights. Even powerful navies tolerated these hubs. It was cheaper to pay occasional ransoms than maintain constant patrols. The arms race never ended. Ships added reinforced rails to repel boarders, so pirates brought grappling hooks with longer reach. Merchants installed hidden compartments, prompting raiders to torture carpenters for their locations. When vessels started carrying attack dogs, pirates threw drugged meat onto decks first. One recovered Maltese manifest lists 12 mastiffs, 23 barrels fresh mutton, untreated, as standard provisions. Insurance existed in crude forms. Rhodian sea laws allowed investors to buy shares in voyages. If a ship returned, they recouped triple their stake. If not, the loss was spread across all backers. Underwriters assessed risk by the captain's scar count. A recovered contract from Corinth specifies higher premiums for commanders missing fingers. Each absent digit adds 5% to the rate. The human toll appears in port records like dry grocery lists. A Carthaginian dock master's tablet notes, Ship 43 arrived. Cargo, half-spoiled hides. Crew, 7 of 22 surviving. No elaboration. Marseille's maritime court archives contain hundreds of petitions from widows seeking permission to remarry after the customary 7-year waiting period for missing sailors. Few were denied. Yet this brutal system somehow enabled cultural exchange. The same pirate coves that stole silks also became informal trading posts. Smugglers introduced Persian melons to Egypt long before official caravans did. Even ransom. Negotiations spread ideas captives, taught languages to their captors. A Syrian merchant's diary recounts being held by Berber raiders for months, during which he introduced them to chess. By the time his family paid up, his jailers were addicted to the game. The greatest paradox? Many pirate strongholds evolved into legitimate ports. Cilician raiders eventually governed Cyprus's busiest harbors. The Malacca Strait's most notorious fraudster became a respected harbor master. His knowledge of smuggling tactics made him an excellent customs enforcer. Violence and commerce shared an uneasy symbiosis, each shaping the other across generations of seafaring. From these negotiated dangers, we turn to the rare pleasant surprises that emerged when foreign goods finally reached eager markets. Imagine biting into your first peach if you were a Remang accustomed to figs. That fuzzy skin would feel alien, the juice too sweet compared to tart Mediterranean fruits. Historians debate whether Lucius Licinius Lucullus actually introduced the peach to Rome after his campaigns in Persia, but the shock of that first taste is undeniable. New foods didn't just arrive, they assaulted local palates. Food was identity, and strangers threatened both. When Indian bananas reached Pacific Islands, elders warned they caused weakness in warriors. Polynesian chiefs banned them from war. Canoe provisions for generations. Citrus fruits faced similar skepticism in Northern Europe. Lemons were initially used as table decorations in Burgundy. No one knew what to do with their sour flesh. Cooks later discovered their juice prevented scurvy, but that took centuries. Merchants learned to market exotic produce carefully. Persian traders demode pomegranates by slicing them vertically to showcase the ruby seeds. Chinese vendors stacked lychees in pyramids to emphasize their abundance. One Greek grocer's account describes rubbing mango skins on customers' wrists so the scent would linger, creating craving. Still, many imports failed. A shipment of durian to Alexandria was thrown overboard after 2 days' crew couldn't tolerate the smell. Medical concerns amplified distrust. Arab physicians wrote that eggplants caused melancholia. Byzantine doctors warned peaches gave fevers if eaten under moonlight. Such beliefs weren't entirely unfounded. Unfamiliar foods did sometimes cause real reactions. When coconuts first arrived in Egypt, several palace tasters broke out in hives from the unfamiliar oils. Word spread that the hairy nuts were cursed. The elite adopted novelties fastest. Roman banquets featured entire courses of imported fruits as power displays. A single serving of dates from Judea might cost more than a farmer's yearly earnings. Status seekers paid premium prices just to say they'd tried something. One patrician's diary brags about serving Persian apples, peaches. At his daughter's wedding, the guests were so confused they mostly just held them as centerpieces. Some foods crossed cultures through pure persistence. Rice took 300 years to transition from Sicilian curiosity to staple crop. The breakthrough came when cooks realized it could be boiled in almond milk for Lenten meals. Similarly, Central Asian apricots only gained traction in Europe after monks began drying them for winter stores. Necessity often defeated prejudice. Religious authorities shaped adoption rates too. Buddhist monks promoted bananas across Asia as meat substitutes. Islamic traders spread citrus along pilgrimage routes. The Quran praises their cleansing properties. But some faiths resisted. Certain Hindu sects rejected potatoes from Spanish traders, calling them underground eggs, unfit for vegetarian diets. Irish priests initially banned tomatoes, considering them love apples that provoked lust. Children frequently bridged the gap. Ship captains brought back exotic fruits as toys before they were food. Mediterranean kids played with pomegranates, like balls, accidentally tasting the seeds during games. Southeast Asian children chewed sugarcane as imitative play after watching sailors do the same. Adults would eventually copy these unofficial tastings. A Venetian log notes sailors teaching local boys to peel bananas. As one removes a glove, the demonstration made the strange fruit seem approachable. Preparation methods eased acceptance. Fermenting baffling fruits into familiar forms helped. Persimmons were too astringent raw, but fermented into wine, it resembled mead. Pineapples proved unpalatable until cooks realized roasting neutralized their acidity. One creative Alexandrian chef candied carambola slices to mimic figs. Technique convinced skeptical customers. The tropics suffered reverse food bias. Pacific Islanders thought European apples lacked flavor compared to breadfruit. Mayans rejected Spanish grapes as wet berries. When Portuguese traders introduced oranges to Japan, locals grew them ornamentally for decades before sampling the fruit. Sometimes the exotic food was too mundane to impress. These encounters reshaped more than diets. Banana cultivation transformed Pacific Island social structures. Who controlled groves gained power. Citrus orchards altered Mediterranean land. Use displacing olive trees in some regions. The peach even changed languages. Its Persian name entered Latin as Malum persicum, evolving into peach through linguistic drift. What began as cautious nibbles became lasting habits. Roman soldiers eventually carried peach pits across Europe to plant at forts. Nordic sailors packed lemons once their preservative power was understood. The durian that once repelled Egyptians became Southeast Asia's beloved king of fruits. Time turned suspicion into tradition, proving even the strangest flavors could eventually feel like home. From these reluctant culinary experiments, we turn to how foreign fabrics provoked even stronger reactions when they first appeared in ancient markets. Roman senators hated silk before they loved it. When the first bolts arrived from the east, they called it woven wind, and not as a compliment. The fabric clung in ways their traditional wool togas never did, revealing contours that offended conservative sensibilities. One particularly scandalized politician claimed silk made men look like effeminate Persians. The irony? He probably owned several silk tunics himself. The moral panic wasn't just about modesty. Silk threatened Rome's entire economic ecosystem. Local wool and linen producers saw their profits vanishing. Senators who'd invested in sheep farms suddenly found their political allies turning against the new fabric. A surviving merchant's ledger from Pompeii shows wool prices dropping 40% in a single year after Chinese silk hit the markets. No wonder they tried banning it. Sumptuary laws targeted silk with bizarre specificity. Women under 40 couldn't wear solid-colored silk dresses. Senators could only wear silk sham on their togas during festivals. One law prohibited silk underwear entirely, though archaeologists keep finding it in Roman trash pits anyway. Enforcement was spotty. Wealthy matrons simply paid the fines as a luxury tax. A recovered letter from a Roman socialite complains about her husband getting fined for her silk shawl and casually mentions buying 2 more the next week. The black market thrived on creative smuggling. Some traders rolled silk inside Egyptian papyrus shipments. Others dyed it dark colors and labeled it as Indian cotton. The most brazen operation involved stitching silk linings into funeral shrouds. Nobody inspected those too closely. Customs. Records from Ostia show officials seizing silk disguised as sailcloth 12 times in 1 month. Each confiscation just drove prices higher. Everyone had theories about how silk was made. Some Romans thought it grew on special trees in India. Others believed Chinese weavers plucked threads from giant spider webs. The wildest rumor claimed silk came from the downy feathers of rare desert birds. The truth was simpler but well guarded. Chinese merchants boiled cocoons to unwind the filaments, a process they kept secret for centuries. When a Byzantine emperor finally got live silkworms smuggled out in 552 AD, it was considered industrial espionage on par with stealing nuclear. Secrets today dot quality control became a nightmare for buyers. Unscrupulous dealers stretched silk threads with cheaper fibers. Some rubbed oils into the fabric to make it feel heavier. A common trick involved weighting shipments with lead beads sewn into the hems. Roman law courts heard endless cases about half-silk garments that turned out to be linen with a glossy finish. One preserved lawsuit describes a bride's dress that literally fell apart during her wedding when the fake stitching dissolved in sweat. The fashion impact went beyond clothing. Wealthy Romans started upholstering furniture with silk and complained it showed every wine stain. Gladiators wore silk ribbons for good luck, despite the fabric's reputation for softness. Even the military wasn't immune. Officers began wearing silk undershirts because it pulled out of wounds more cleanly than wool when barbed arrows struck. Practicality often trumped propriety. Religious leaders couldn't decide if silk was sacred or sinful. Early Christian bishops condemned it as vanity, then quietly accepted silk altar cloths donated by rich parishioners. Jewish weavers in Alexandria developed special silk prayer shawls with blue threads to satisfy religious requirements. In Persia, Zoroastrian priests argued whether silk funeral wrappings were ritually pure. The fabric became a theological Rorschach test across cultures. The economic effects rippled outward. Roman gold flowed east in staggering amounts. Pliny the Elder complained that India and China drained 100 million sesterces from Rome annually for silk and spices. That's roughly $5 billion in today's money. The trade deficit became so severe that Emperor Tiberius temporarily banned men from wearing silk to stem the outflow. It worked about as well as modern trade wars usually do. Silk changed Mediterranean, weaving techniques forever. Local artisans reverse-engineered the fabric using stolen cocoons, creating hybrid textiles. Syrian workshops produced siricum, part silk, part local fibers. Egyptian weavers invented tabby weave to mimic Chinese patterns. These knockoffs sold for half the price of real imports, creating a middle-class market. A Pompeii wall painting actually advertises Chinese-style curtains that were made locally. The secrecy around silk routes wasn't just about protecting profits. Chinese merchants deliberately spread misinformation about geography to maintain their monopoly. They told Roman traders the fabric came from mysterious lands beyond India, adding months to imaginary journeys. Some maps placed silk origins near mythical creatures to discourage competitors. It worked remarkably well. Nobody successfully followed the overland routes until the 2nd century. Silk's legacy outlasted empires. When Rome fell, Byzantine workshops kept the weaving traditions alive. Muslim conquerors preserved Syrian silk production techniques. Venetian merchants eventually turned silk into Europe's first true luxury brand. That original moral panic seems quaint now, but it reveals how threatened societies feel when something truly new appears. The next time you see a silk tie or scarf, remember, someone once thought that fabric could topple civilizations. From the material world of fabrics, we turn to how trade routes carried something even more disruptive than luxury goods: new ways of thinking about the divine. The monk who carried Buddhism by boat wasn't some legendary figure. He was usually a tired traveler catching space on a merchant vessel. These religious men hitched rides alongside bales of silk and jars of oil, paying their way by serving as ship scribes or medical attendants. One surviving cargo manifest from Palmyra lists one ascetic, 2 sax pulses as part of a shipment bound for Barbaricon. Faith spread in the musty corners of trading ships, moving at the same glacial pace as the goods crowding the holds. Port officials eyed these holy passengers with suspicion. Customs records show Buddhist monks being held for questioning in Roman. Alexandria authorities worried they might be spies mapping harbor defenses. A Persian governor's letter complains about hairless men in orange robes, delaying inspections by refusing to step on images of fire deities. Crews weren't much friendlier. Several Jataka tales describe monks being given the worst sleeping spots near leaky hull sections. One Sri Lankan text mentions a novice who slept curled in an empty grain barrel for 3 months during his voyage to Java. Buddhism spread relied heavily on pit stops at trading posts. Merchants would deposit monks at way stations along there. Routes like living cargo. These way stations evolved into temples that later attracted local devotees. The process was painfully slow. A monk might wait years for another ship heading further down the coast. The Gandhara monk Faxian spent 6 months stranded in Sumatra before finding passage to China. His journal mentions trading his spare robe for rice during the wait. Islamic expansion followed similar currents. Arab traders established prayer spaces in foreign ports decades before formal mosques appeared. A recovered ledger from Calicut shows a ship's captain paying dock fees for a space to unroll mats. In 712 CE, these improvised prayer areas often became permanent features. The oldest mosque in Indonesia started as a simple enclosure. Near pepper warehouses, sailors added palm frond roofing between monsoons. By the time proper missionaries arrived, the foundations were already set. The real religious mixing happened in port cities' back alleys. Zoroastrian bankers funded Hindu temples in Gujarat. Nestorian Christian traders attended Buddhist ceremonies in Canton to maintain business relationships. A Jewish merchant's letter from medieval Cairo describes hiring a Muslim scribe to copy Torah portions because he worked cheaper than the synagogue scribes. Practical compromises outweighed theological purity when cargo needed moving. Relics traveled like trade goods. Buddhist stupas in Burma received donations of Mediterranean glass beads, repurposed as sacred objects. A bishop in Syria complained about local Christians venerating a heathen idol, later revealed to be a Buddha statue misdelivered with a spice shipment. Even prayer styles crossed cultures. Persian miniatures show Muslim merchants adopting the Buddhist mudra hand gesture during negotiations, thinking it brought good luck. The sea routes spawned unique hybrid practices. In Malacca, sailors mixed Quranic verses with chants to the sea goddess Mariamman. Javanese shadow puppets incorporated stories from both the Ramayana and Arab merchant lore. A recovered ships. Log from Oman mentions crew members making offerings at every port, flowers for Hindu gods here, coins for Greek sea spirits there. Survival outweighed consistency when facing ocean storms. Competition between faiths turned fierce in some ports. A 9th century Chinese edict banned Buddhist monks from staying in Guangzhou's foreign quarters after they kept disturbing the Mohammedans. Venetian records describe rival groups of Christian and Muslim merchants racing to rebuild each other's storm-damaged shrines, not out of respect, but to prove their god's superiority. The stakes were high. Whichever deity seemed more powerful gained more converts among impressionable dockworkers. Yet cooperation often won out. Jewish money lenders in Aden ensured Hajj pilgrim ships. Parsis financed Buddhist temple construction. In Ceylon, knowing it improved trade relations. A remarkable papyrus from Fusta shows a Coptic Christian, a Jewish trader, and a Muslim sailor jointly commissioning a protective amulet bearing symbols from all three traditions, the ultimate interfaith insurance policy. The system wasn't perfect. Religious tensions sometimes exploded, like when a mob in Alexandria burned a cargo of palm leaf scriptures, mistaking them for sorcery scrolls. More often, though, the close quarters bred grudging tolerance. You couldn't refuse to share a lifeboat with someone just because they prayed differently. As one Nestorian trader wrote, gods may argue, but sailors need each other. Port cities became religious archives by accident. A Buddhist stupa in Nagapattinam contained Zoroastrian fire ashes in its foundation. Bruges churches displayed Islamic astrolabes as Christian relics. These weren't conscious fusions so much as accumulated layers each generation, adding new fragments without fully erasing the old. The sea routes didn't just transport faiths, they blurred them. From these spiritual exchanges, we turn to the less welcome travelers that hitched rides on the same ship's disease vectors that cared nothing for human borders or beliefs. The deadliest cargo never appeared on any ship's manifest. While merchants obsessed over pepperweights and silk quality, black rats scurried through the bilge water below. Their fleas carried something worse than any pirate the bacterium Yersinia pestis. This invisible threat moved between ports with terrifying efficiency, hitching rides on the same ships that carried precious goods across continents. The black rat's journey from India to Europe tells this story perfectly. These rodents had lived alongside humans in South Asia for centuries, both species gradually developing tolerances to local diseases. But when Indian Ocean trade routes expanded in the 14th century, the rats found new passage. They hid in grain sacks, nested in cotton bales, and reproduced explosively during long voyages. A single merchant ship could carry hundreds without the crew ever realizing. No one understood the connection at first. Mediterranean port cities noticed more dead rats washing up in harbors, but focused on spoiled cargo. Then people started dying. The plague reached Sicily in 1347 aboard a Genoese ship from Crimea. Within weeks, 60% of Messina's population was dead. Still, trade continued. The economic machine couldn't stop even for mass graves. Early quarantine measures developed out of desperation. Venice instituted the first formal system in 1377, requiring ships to anchor offshore for 40 days before docking, quaranta giorni, becoming quarantine. The theory was sound, but execution faltered. Wealthy merchants bribed officials to shorten waits. Sailors sneaked ashore at night. Even when enforced, The 40 days didn't always cover the incubation period. The Venetian plague of 1576 killed nearly a third of the city despite these precautions. Some ports became permanent plague zones due to geography and trade patterns. Constantinople sat at a crossroads of sea routes, suffering outbreaks every decade for 3 centuries. Alexandria's grain warehouses fed both rats and fleas, maintaining constant reservoirs of infection. The Marmara port of Gallipoli remained contaminated so long that Ottoman admirals avoided docking there entirely, calling it the Sultan's mousetrap. The conditions aboard ships accelerated transmission. Crews slept packed together on straw mattresses that rarely got replaced. Fleas moved freely between human and rat hosts. One surviving ship's log from Marseille notes 3 men fevered yesterday, 7 today, followed by an inventory of silk bolts business continuing amidst collapse. Sailors knew the signs: swollen lymph nodes, blackened skin, and that distinctive sweet rotten smell preceding death. Merchants developed crude risk assessments. They paid higher premiums for ships coming from plague zones, though they rarely stopped shipments entirely. A recovered insurance contract from Genoa lists special clauses for death cargoes that had to be aired for weeks before unpacking. Some captains took to smuggling infected cloth anyway, soaking it in vinegar to mask the telltale odors. Ground zero for many outbreaks was the rat's favorite hiding place, the grain shipment. Medieval Europe's insatiable demand for wheat and barley created perfect breeding conditions. A single infested sack could seed an entire city's downfall. After the 1665 London plague, officials noted that the first cases all clustered near dockside granaries. Yet no one made the connection to rodents. They blamed bad air or divine wrath instead. The flea's biology made containment impossible. Xenopsila kiavis could survive weeks without a host in cargo holds. Their bites transmitted plague bacteria directly into human bloodstreams. Even if port authorities killed every rat in sight, which they tried, offering bounties for tails, the fleas simply jumped to new hosts: dogs, cats, even chickens. A Barcelona health inspector's report from 1651 mentions finding fleas in a shipment of wool 3 months after the original rats had died. Cultural practices worsened the spread. The medieval fur trade shipped millions of squirrel pelts from Russia to Western Europe. These skins often arrived with their original passengers, dead but flea-ridden. Tailors working with the pelts were among the first plague victims in many cities. Yet demand continued because squirrel fur lined the robes of the wealthy, a status symbol worth dying for. Some courts tried radical solutions. Dubrovnik constructed offshore Lazaretto stone quarantine islands where goods and people waited before entering the city. Marseille officials burned entire shiploads of cotton in 1720 after suspecting contamination. But these measures came too late in most cases. The same trade networks that enriched cities also ensured their repeated devastation. The black rat's legacy persists in unexpected ways. Modern genetic studies show that European populations developed some plague resistance. Over centuries of exposure, the same CCR5 delta 3 2 mutation that helped survivors resist Yersinia. Pestis today confers resistance to HIV. The rats themselves eventually lost ground to larger, brown rats in the 18th century, not through human effort, but because sturdier ship construction left fewer hiding spots. Against all logic, the plague years saw increased long-distance trade. As populations dwindled, survivors inherited more wealth per capita. Demand for luxuries actually grew among those who remained. A Venetian merchant's ledger from 1360, the height of outbreaks, shows record purchases of imported spices and silks. The dead were buried in mass graves, while the living wore finer clothes than ever before. From these invisible killers hiding in cargo holds, we turn to the deliberate movement of knowledge, the fragile instruments and fragile ideas that traveled the same routes, but offered salvation rather than death. The astrolabe didn't arrive in Europe with fanfare. It came tucked in the baggage of merchants who barely understood its purpose. This Islamic invention from the 8th century looked like a fancy toy to most sailors until someone demonstrated how it could calculate latitude by measuring the angle of the sun. Suddenly, captains realized they might not have to hug the coastline anymore. Resistance to foreign tech was standard. Mediterranean shipwrights scoffed at the lateen sail when Arab traders first used it in their waters. The triangular design seemed flimsy compared to sturdy square sails. But after watching Doubts outmaneuver their ships for decades, a few Venetian builders quietly copied the design. By 1200, the lateen sail dominated Mediterranean shipping. No official announcement, just better profits. The astrolabe's spread followed similar patterns. Jewish scholars in Toledo translated Arabic manuals in the 12th century, but most sea captains ignored the texts. It took another 100 years before some Genoese navigators started carrying crude copies. Even then, many preferred traditional methods. A recovered ship's log from 1293 mentions the astrolabe being used alongside the old star stick, because why trust some foreign gadget? Shipbuilding techniques crossed cultures through stolen labor. When the Portuguese wanted to learn Indian Ocean ship designs, they didn't send engineers, they captured Malay craftsmen. These unwilling teachers revealed how to build hulls that flexed in monsoons rather than cracked, and knowledge spread through whispers in shipyards. A Lisbon builder's notebook from 1512 contains sketches labeled Malabar Method, next to crude drawings of knees and joints. Technological misunderstandings were common. Chinese junks used bulkheads for stability, but European copies often omitted. Them builders thought they were just storage partitions. The result? Leaky, unstable ships that confirmed skeptics' biases. It took 3 centuries for the proper bulkhead technique to catch on in the West. Similar delays happened with the sternpost rudder, which Arabs had used since the 9th century. But Europeans only adopted around 1300 dot. The astrolabe faced extra hurdles because it required new math. Islamic astronomy used sign functions, while Europe still relied on Roman numerals. Early European astrolabes often had calculation errors because makers didn't grasp the underlying principles. One surviving specimen from Marseille has latitude, markings that are off by 5 degrees enough to wreck a ship. No wonder many captains kept trusting seabirds and wave patterns instead. Some technologies spread through war rather than trade. The lateen sail reached northern Europe after Crusaders saw Arab ships using it. They brought back the concept, but without understanding wind dynamics. Early northern European lateen rigs performed poorly until someone realized you needed to adjust the sail's angle constantly. That innovation had been standard practice in the Red Sea for centuries. That cultural pride slowed adoption. Chinese shipwrights resisted European hull designs even after seeing their advantages. A Ming official's report dismisses Portuguese carracks as overbuilt tubs right before the same document complains about leaks in imperial chunks. Similarly, Arab navigators initially rejected the magnetic compass because it contradicted their celestial methods. Both cultures eventually incorporated foreign tech, but only after decades of avoidable shipwrecks. The best tech transfer happened in port cities. Alexandria's shipyards became mixing pots where Greek, Arab, and Indian builders shared tricks. A 14th century account describes Egyptian shipwrights teaching Venetians how to seal hulls with a mix of lime and crushed pottery, a method the Venetians later claimed as their own. Such exchanges were rarely documented, but the archaeological record doesn't lie. Dig up any Mediterranean port, and you'll find ship fragments showing hybrid designs. Materials availability shaped what spread. The lateen sail required strong cotton canvas, which wasn't readily available in wool-dependent Europe. Only after Italian merchants established Egyptian cotton trade routes could Mediterranean ships fully adopt the technology. Likewise, good astrolabes needed precise brass casting, a skill Europe lacked until Islamic metalworkers migrated to Spain. No amount of stolen blueprints could overcome material limitations. The astrolabe's eventual success came from simplification. Persian models had over 30 moving parts. European versions trimmed that to 10. Less accuracy, but more usability. By 1450, even fishermen in Brittany carried cheap wooden astrolabes, though most just used them to impress buyers at market. The real navigational value came when someone combined the simplified astrolabe with improved compasses and better charts. Delays had real costs. If Europe had adopted the lateen sail and astrolabe 2 centuries earlier, someone might have reached the Americas before Columbus. But cultural stubbornness kept ships slow and navigation imprecise. The Vikings actually had better longitude finding methods than Mediterranean sailors in 1200. They just didn't write them down. The payoff took centuries. When Portuguese explorers finally rounded Africa, they did it with Arab-inspired lateen sails, Chinese-inspired hull designs, and Islamic-inspired navigation tools. The Age of Discovery was really just Europe catching up to technologies that had been circulating for ages. Vasco da Gama's secret weapon? An Arab pilot named Ibn Majid, who actually knew how to cross the Indian Ocean properly. From these practical tools, we turn to how trade goods influenced something less tangible, but equally valuable artistic expression across cultures. European potters stared at Chinese porcelain like it was magic. These thin, singing bowls that rang when tapped seemed impossible to reproduce. For centuries, Kilns from Venice to London kept producing thick, muddy imitations that cracked in the oven or turned lumpy in the glaze. The frustration shows in guild records. Florence's ceramic masters find apprentices who wasted materials on failed attempts. Everyone knew the real thing came from the East, carried by ships that took years to make the trip. The impact wasn't just about dinnerware. Chinese blue and white patterns rewired artistic brains across continents. Persian miniaturists began framing scenes with willow branches copied from Jingdezhen exports. Ottoman tile makers shifted from geometric mosaics to flowing floral designs after seeing shipments unloaded in Istanbul's ports. Even the pigments changed. Middle Eastern artists started using cobalt from the same Kashmiri mines that supplied Chinese workshops. The look spread so fast that within decades, you'd find nearly identical vying patterns on Syrian mosque tiles and Ming Dynasty vases. Imitation attempts revealed technological gaps. Islamic potters had superior glazing techniques, but lacked China's kaolin clay. Their workarounds created something new. Iznik pottery from Turkey mimicked the blue hues, but developed its own thicker, more opaque style. Egyptian artisans tried stamping porcelain-like patterns onto faience, resulting in weird hybrid pieces. That looked Chinese from across the room, but disappointed up close. The best Middle Eastern copies still weighed twice as much as the originals. Europe's early efforts were laughable. Rich families would display porcelain that was actually leather or coconut shells coated with lacquer. Medici workshops produced porcellana that shattered if you looked at it wrong. The problem wasn't just skill. Nobody west of Samarkand understood the chemistry. Potters kept adding weird ingredients like crushed glass or eggshells, hoping for a breakthrough. An English craftsman's 1583 notebook lists 37 failed recipes, including oxbone, ground flint, and maiden's urine. The fakes had consequences. Venice's glassmakers lobbied to ban porcelain imports, arguing their blue glass imitations were just as good. They weren't. Dutch traders exploited the confusion by selling defective Chinese pieces as European style at jacked up prices. Wealthy buyers complained about vases arriving with concealed cracks filled with wax scam, so common that London shops began displaying items underwater to prove they weren't doctored. Breakthroughs came through industrial espionage. A Jesuit priest named Francois Xavier d'Entrecoles smuggled China's porcelain secrets out in 1712, sending letters describing kill temperatures and clay mixtures. Even then, European workshops struggled. The first successful Meissen pieces in 1710 looked clumsy next to Chinese imports. Their blue pigment ran and the glaze bubbled. It took 20 more years of stolen techniques and kidnapped artisans before Europe could consistently produce quality porcelain. The imperfect copies spawned new aesthetics. Unable to replicate Chinese landscapes, German painters invented their own weird patterns. Meissen's onion design wasn't actually onions, but stylized peaches and pomegranates based on mistranslations. Dutch Delftware embraced crude brushstrokes as a stylistic choice once they realized they couldn't match Chinese precision. English potters invented transfer printing, when their hand-painted designs kept looking uneven. Every failure forced innovation. Demand reshaped entire industries. Mines in Saxony reopened to hunt for kaolin deposits. Chemists developed new cobalt blues that wouldn't bleed in the kiln. The hunt for the perfect glaze led to discoveries like bone china, an English concoction using ash from cattle bones, something Chinese potters never tried. By 1800, European factories were producing original designs, but the ghost of those early failures lingered. You can still see the insecurity in surviving pieces. Early Meissen figurines have thicker bases than necessary, as if the makers didn't trust the material's strength. Italian porcelain cabinets hide wooden frames beneath thin ceramic panels. Even after mastering the craft, Western artisans couldn't shake their awe of the originals. A 1783 inventory from Versailles lists one Chinese celadon bowl as worth 12 locally made dinner services. The attempts changed more than ceramics. Chinese motifs crept into European wallpaper and furniture. The mania for blue and white patterns revived nearly dead textile techniques in France. Silverware designs slimmed down to match porcelain's delicacy. Some historians argue the entire Rococo movement emerged from Europe's failure to copy. Asian art properly all, those asymmetrical swirls were basically cover for imperfect imitations. The real lesson wasn't about clay, but cultural transmission. Skills move slowly without context. Chinese potters spent generations perfecting their craft within an unbroken tradition. You can't steal that in a shipment. What Europe eventually created wasn't Chinese porcelain, but something else entirely, shaped by all those flawed attempts. Today's antique markets tell the story. The best imitation pieces now command prices near the originals, not as copies, but as artifacts of a global obsession. From these artistic struggles, we turn to something far more mundane, yet equally transformative: the account books that decided which treasures were worth shipping at all. The tea merchant's ledger told the real story behind those slow boats. Not every exotic good made the journey. Some remained regional specialties because the numbers never added up. Page after page recorded calculations in cramped script. Expected prices, transport costs, probable spoilage rates. The deciding factor wasn't beauty or rarity, but how much profit could survive an 18-month round trip to Canton. Take fresh lychees. A single basket sold for a fortune in Tang Dynasty Chang'an, but no ship would carry them westward. The fruits browned within days, becoming fit only for throwing at irritating port officials, as one captain's log. Jokes. Conversely, dried tea leaves weighed little and didn't rot. A chest that cost 6 silver taels in Fuyan could fetch 20 in Cairo. That markup covered the risks pirates, storms, and the inevitable barrels lost to dampness. Middlemen shaped these decisions more than producers. Persian brokers in Guangzhou would reject shipments of jade carvings they deemed too figurative for Islamic markets. Venetian factors stationed in Alexandria filtered out certain Indian fabrics based on projected European tastes. A recovered correspondence between two Genoese merchants shows one complaining about the Armenian who keeps refusing our best crimson silks. He says, Flanders buyers prefer duller hues. The goods that traveled farthest often weren't the finest, but the most universally palatable. Transport costs followed brutal math. Bulk spices like pepper traveled well precisely because they could be crammed into any available space. Frankincense resin occupied less ship volume than the wood it came from. One Rhodian shipping manual advises, if it doesn't stack, stow, or compress, leave it ashore. This explains why exotic furniture rarely appears in early trade records. A single ebony chair consumed cargo space equal to 50 pounds of saffron. Only kings could afford such inefficiency. The risk-reward calculations got granular. Captains knew amber floated, so they'd accept crates with loose packing, knowing some pieces might be lost during unloading. Porcelain shipments always included sacrificial outer layers of cheaper bowls to absorb handling damage. Tea merchants deliberately over-dried their leaves by 5% to account for humidity absorption during transit. Every commodity had its own calculus of expected shrinkage. Weather patterns forced hard choices. Monsoon winds made some routes strictly. Seasonal a pepper ship leaving India after April risked getting becalmed for months. The smartest traders diversified. A surviving partnership agreement from Calicut shows 3 merchants splitting a cargo. 1/3 spices, quick sell. 1/3 ivory, slow profit. 1/3 lacquerware, speculative. A mix balanced quick returns against long shots. Local tastes created invisible barriers. When Chinese green tea first reached Morocco, buyers rejected it as unripe compared to their familiar black varieties. It took decades before anyone thought to smoke the leaves over pine wood, creating the distinctive gunpowder tea that finally appealed to North African palates. Similar adaptation failures happened everywhere. Russian traders couldn't move. Sichuan peppercorns passed Moscow until someone tried grinding them into soup powder. The personal whims of rulers altered trade flows unpredictably. A Sasanian Shah's love for Khotan's jade carvings meant whole shipments got diverted to his court. Byzantine emperors banning Indian cottons to protect local wool weavers accidentally spawned a smuggling empire. One frustrated Venetian memo notes, "The Grand Khan wants only white porcelain this year. Our stock of blue florals rots in Hangzhou warehouses." Some luxuries became trapped by their own value. Maldivian cowrie shells used as currency in West Africa were too cheap to ship in small quantities, but too bulky to move en masse. Baltic amber fetched high prices, but a single storm could wipe out a season's harvest. The most telling entries in merchant ledgers are the crossed-out one's goods that seemed profitable until someone actually tried exporting them. Taxes and bribes reshaped routes mid-journey. A cargo might change hands 6 times between producer and consumer just to avoid cumulative duties. Ottoman toll records show pepper sacks deliberately routed through Macedonia instead of Constantinople to skirt higher tariffs. Armenian traders perfected the art of invoice tailoring, listing fine silks as coarse hemp when passing certain checkpoints. The human cost appears between the ledger lines. Shipments accepted with crews' lives as collateral meant merchants took loans payable only if vessels returned. A dark notation in one Lipo account book reads, "Advanced. 30 diners against Hessen's India voyage. If lost, his wife becomes our washerwoman. The spice trade's glittering profits were built on such brutal arithmetic. What finally emerges from these records is how accidental globalism was. The tea that reached London and the porcelain in Mexico City weren't chosen by design, but through countless small decisions by merchants guessing what might sell. The goods that changed history got lucky, their numbers happened to work out. From these commercial calculations, we turn to how one particular imported seasoning rewrote entire culinary traditions. Imagine a medieval kitchen where the cook adds 12 ounces of pepper to a single dish. That wasn't a mistake, it was standard practice in wealthy households. European palates went wild for spices in ways that would baffle modern diners. A typical recipe from 14th century France might include pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves in the same dish, creating flavor bombs we'd now find overwhelming. The rich weren't just showing off. They genuinely believed these intense flavors had health benefits. Pepper started as medicine before it became seasoning. Medieval doctors prescribed it for everything from lethargy to plague. A standard cure for colds involved sniffing pepper until you sneezed violently. Wealthy patients took pills made of powdered pepper and honey for digestion. Poorer people had to make do with weaker local alternatives, like mustard seeds. Apothecaries kept their pepper in locked boxes, dispensing it by the grain, like pharmacists with opioids today. The spice blends traveling along trade. Routes kept changing as they moved. What left India as simple black pepper arrived in Venice, mixed with long pepper and cubeb berries, two relatives that grew along shipping routes. Cooks didn't separate them. They tossed the whole mix into stews. Ships' manifests show sacks labeled pepper often contained up to 30% other spices. Nobody complained because nobody knew the difference. Preservation drove these heavy spice uses more than taste. Before refrigeration, peppered meats lasted longer. The antibacterial properties slowed spoilage, though medieval cooks took it to extremes. A surviving English recipe for preserving beef calls for enough pepper to make a strong man weep. Some noble households hung pepper-rubbed carcasses from their kitchen ceilings like primitive spice cabinets. The meat absorbed flavors while staying edible for months. Spice combinations became regional signatures based on what ships delivered. Northern Europe got pepper-heavy blends because it traveled better in cold climates. Mediterranean ports mixed theirs with saffron that arrived from nearby Spain. A cookbook from Moorish Spain reads like a trade map: pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cumin from Egypt, all in one dish. The flavors reflected which merchants passed through town. Pepper's heat wasn't just for flavor, it covered up problems. Wealthy hosts worried guests might notice slightly off meat underneath all that spice. Some cooks took advantage. Documents complain of spoiled venison hidden beneath pepper's burn. Church officials actually debated whether overspicing food to mask rot broke Lenten fasting rules. The consensus? Only if you enjoyed doing it. The working class experienced pepper differently when they got it at all. Rural laborers might score a pinch during harvest bonuses. They typically used it medicinally rather than wasting it on food. Parish records show poor families trading pepper grains, like currency 3 grains, could buy a chicken. 20 might cover a minor debt. Some enterprising peasants grew fake pepper from local plants that mimicked the heat. Trade markups created. Bizarre pricing. At various points, pepper literally cost its weight in silver. Cookbooks from noble kitchens note servants counting individual peppercorns back into locked storage after use. Theft carried brutal penalties. A German law code prescribed cutting off a hand for stealing more than 12 peppercorns. Yet merchants frequently watered down shipments with pepper dust and berry stems to increase profits. Medical beliefs shaped cooking techniques. Doctors claimed pepper heated the body, so they recommended it in winter dishes. Summer recipes used milder spices. This wasn't complete nonsense. The vasodilation from capsaicin does warm you up. Wealthy households served different spice blends by season, while the poor just suffered through whatever they had. Pepper transformed entire dishes. Sauces thickened with breadcrumbs absorbed more spice than thin broths. Cooks developed heavy, peppered gravies to showcase their expensive ingredients. The original purpose of sauce wasn't flavor enhancement, but spice delivery, a way to make. Sure, none of that precious pepper went to waste. Modern cream sauces descend from these medieval experiments. The pepper craze died slowly. As supplies increased, elite tastes shifted towards subtler flavors. Renaissance cooks started using herbs instead of overpowering spices. Some traditional pepper-heavy dishes survived as nostalgic oddities. A 16th century Venetian banquet menu includes a great pepper pot, course that guests barely touched the host. Just wanted to show he could still afford old-fashioned excess. Oddly, pepper's decline made it more democratic. By 1700, even modest. Households could buy small amounts, but they used it differently, treating it as occasional accent rather than main event. That same century saw new recipes advising a sparing sprinkle rather than handfuls. A transition appears in kitchen inventories, where medieval lists note pepper by the pound. Later ones measure it in ounces. Today's black pepper would confuse medieval cooks. Modern cultivars are milder than ancient ones, bred for subtlety. Over punch. Those old trade routes disappeared, taking with them pepper's companions like long pepper and grains of paradise. What remains is a ghost of that original spice frenzy, the quiet dash on your table that once toppled empires and inspired voyages. From these culinary transformations, we come to the public spaces where the social rituals around new imports develop their own rules and rebellions. The first coffee houses weren't about the coffee. They were about what happened when strangers sat together drinking it. In 17th century London, these places became laboratories for ideas you couldn't discuss in church or taverns. A penny got you admission and a cup of bitter liquid. For another penny, someone would read you the latest pamphlet. The real draw was the conversation, endless debates about politics, science, and scandals the crown would rather keep quiet. Authorities hated them immediately. Charles II tried banning coffeehouses in 1675, calling them seminaries of sedition. He wasn't wrong. Plots against the monarchy got hatched over those steaming cups. The Royal Exchange complained coffee houses were stealing their business, since merchants now conducted deals there instead of formal trading floors. Worst of all, anyone could join nobles rubbed elbows with printers and physicians. Social hierarchies dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee. The Japanese did tea differently. Their tea ceremonies were exercises in control, not freewheeling debate. Every movement from how you held the bowl to where you placed the whisk followed. Precise rules. Warlords used these rituals as diplomatic tools. Hideyoshi, the 16th century unifier of Japan, would invite rivals to tea instead of battle. The message was clear. Follow the ritual. Acknowledge my authority, and we'll talk instead of fight. A single misstep could mean war. One daimyo's diary recalls sweating through 3 layers of robes, trying not to cough during a crucial tea gathering. Chocolate drinking spread through European courts like gossip. The Spanish learned about it from Aztec nobles who drank it, cold and spiced with chili. By the time it reached Versailles, the recipe had changed, heated with sugar and vanilla, served in tiny porcelain cups. Louis XIV's chefs prepared it at bedside as a morning restorative. The trick was making it frothy. Special pitchers with hinged lids let servants pour it from heights to create foam, proving they'd used enough of the expensive beans. An observer noted the king would reject cups with insufficient bubbles. What made these drink status symbols wasn't just the exotic ingredients. It was the accessories they spawned. Silver chocolate pots became family heirlooms. Turkish coffee required special ibriks with long spouts. Japanese tea masters curated collections of imperfect bowls, each with its own name and history. The richer you were, the more elaborate your serving ritual. A Venetian merchant's inventory lists 1 Moorish table for coffee with inlaid chessboard and 24 tiny spoons. He didn't even like coffee, he just needed the props. Coffee houses survived bans because they were too useful to suppress. Lawyers met clients there. Scientists debated discoveries before publishing them. Lloyd's of London started as a coffee house where ship captains shared news. The East India Company eventually gave up trying to squash them and started planting rumors in them instead. An employee's letter brags about placing certain truths in the ears of coffeemen to manipulate stock prices. Tea's social ascent was slower but more enduring. The English turned afternoon tea into a performance of gentility. Upper class. Women collected tea tidbits, small sandwiches, and cakes to display their housekeeping skills. An etiquette manual from 1744 warns readers not to gulp like farmhands or let their pinkies extend too far when holding cups. The working class adopted the ritual cheaply, using reused leaves and shared cups. By 1800, even factories gave workers tea breaks, not out of kindness, but because productivity improved with caffeine. Chocolate remained exclusive longest. The Spanish guarded their cacao supplies fiercely. For 2 centuries, they controlled the European supply by only processing beans in Seville. Smugglers who stole seedlings to plant in colonies faced execution. When the Dutch finally got their own plantations in Java, they celebrated by printing chocolate recipe books and charged absurd prices for them. A surviving note between merchants discusses deliberately keeping supplies low to preserve the mystique. The beverages shaped global politics in unexpected ways. Tea taxes sparked revolutions. Coffee tariffs funded colonial armies. Chocolate profits rebuilt cities after earthquakes. But their deepest impact was on daily interactions. That London coffee house where Isaac Newton dissected a dolphin? It's why we have scientific societies today. The Parisian salon where philosophers drank chocolate while writing encyclopedias? That's where modern democracy got drafted. These drinks didn't just cross cultures, they created new ones. Next time you stand in line at a cafe, look around. The people tapping laptops are heirs to those coffeehouse debaters. The friends sharing matcha? They're continuing a samurai's peace ritual. Even your morning cocoa connects you to Spanish conquistadors. Worrying their froth wasn't thick enough. Some imports fade, but these stuck because they gave us excuses to gather. And humanity will always need that, whether the drink in hand is coffee, tea, or something stronger from these relatively tamed social lubricants. We turn to the darker substances that traveled the same routes but left action and empires in their wake. The marketplace didn't ring with coins before standardized currency. It clattered with cowrie shells, jingled with lumps of salt, and smelled like bundles of tobacco leaves changing hands. Money was whatever people agreed had value, and that list got weird fast. Try paying your rent with peppercorns today and see how far that gets you. But in ancient times, that was perfectly respectable. COWRIE shells from the Maldives became the closest thing to a global currency before silver. Their durability and uniform size made them ideal for counting. Chinese merchants used them as small change as early as 1500 BCE. Dig up any ancient Silk Road trading post and you'll find piles of them. African kingdoms weighed them by the bushel for major purchases. One Timbuktu manuscript records a nobleman buying a house for 12 sacks of good cowries without cracks. The shells spread so far that when Europeans arrived in West Africa with chests of them, locals just shrugged and kept using them alongside coins. Salt carried literal worth its weight in some places. Roman soldiers sometimes got paid in it. That's where salary comes from, sal being Latin for salt. Sahara caravans transported salt bricks strapped to camels like living vaults. An excavated merchant's ledger from Tagaza lists salt trades for gold at a fixed rate. 1 slab equals 3 dinar weights of dust. The salt mines there were so valuable that no one lived near them permanently. Workers rotated in and out under armed guard because the environment was lethally hot. Dry spices functioned as both currency and collateral. A medieval Venetian bank would accept pepper sacks as loan security. Recipes from English manor houses specify spice notes, not by taste, but by value. Add saffron equal to a day's wages for stirring. That pinch of pepper costing more than a month's wages. Wasn't hyperbole. It was how people stored wealth before banks. Pilgrims to Mecca often carried nutmeg instead of coins, since it was lighter, and traders everywhere knew its value. Barter never fully disappeared, especially for specialty items. A shipwright might pay for iron nails with future boat repairs. Midwives accepted chickens for deliveries. Viking sagas describe complex multi-good trades. One sword, 2 casks butter, and a winter's fodder for the thrall named Olaf. These deals required witnesses because without standard values, someone always felt cheated later. Court records. From York show a butcher suing a fisherman over a disputed barrel dash of dash herring dash for dash side dash of dash beef exchange gone sour 10 years prior. The confusion peaked when trade routes overlapped. Imagine a Phoenician trader trying to sell Tyrian purple dye in 3 different ports. Silver coins in Greece, copper chunks in Iberia, and linen sheets in Egypt. No wonder they carried scales everywhere. You never knew what form payment would. Take a recovered captain's log from Byblos complains. Spent all morning arguing whether 20 measures cedar equals 1 Egyptian gold devon or 1 1/4. Settled for 5 bolts of mid-grade linen instead. Some objects became currency through sheer persistence. Tea bricks compressed into hard cakes circulated across Central Asia for centuries. You could literally break off a corner to make change. Russian trappers used them in Alaska during the fur trade era. Native American groups unfamiliar with tea still accepted them because they knew other traders would too. Similar things happened with iron nails in colonial America and chocolate. Beans in Mesoamerica, if enough people treated something as money, it became money. The transition to coins wasn't smooth. Early Lydian electrum pieces fluctuated in purity, so much that merchants tested each one by biting them. Chinese knife money looked like actual miniature blades, great for stabbing cheating merchants, less great for fitting in purses. Greek. Soldiers distrusted early stamped coins, so much they'd hammer them into rough lumps before spending, defeating the whole point of minting. It took generations before people trusted that a stamped piece of metal was worth whatever the stamp said. Odd currencies left marks on language. The Russian word for money, denji, comes from the Tatar word for squirrel pelts. Spanish, pecuniary, stems from pecus, meaning cattle. English fee traces back to Norse, fey for livestock. These linguistic fossils show how deeply trade goods permeated society. Even after coins dominated, people still thought in terms of real goods. Medieval English court fines are often listed in peppercorn equivalents. Well into the 1300s. The real test of any currency was portability. Cowries worked because 2,000 fit in a small sack. Salt failed over long distances. Humid weather could ruin a fortune. Spices had the opposite problem in hot climates. Sacks lost weight as oils evaporated. This gradual winnowing explains why metallic money eventually won out. Silver might tarnish, but it didn't vanish between quarts. Still, the old systems persisted in remote areas. Norwegian fishermen were bartering stockfish for grain directly with Baltic farmers as late as the 1800s. What made some objects universally valued wasn't royal decree, but simple practicality. A good trade medium needed to be durable, divisible, recognizable, and in controlled supply. Cowries ticked all boxes. You couldn't counterfeit them easily when they came from specific islands. Salt was hard to mine in bulk without infrastructure. Even tobacco leaves used in colonial America met these criteria. Plantations, controlled output, and everyone knew what cured leaves should look like. The true legacy of these early currencies isn't in museums, but in modern finance. When you swipe a credit card today, you're still trading intangible value, just with electrons instead of calories. Bitcoin miners chasing digital coins aren't so different from Saharan laborers digging salt slabs. The forms change, but the game stays the same. Convince enough people something has worth, and it does. From these makeshift solutions for measuring value, we arrive at a single ship whose journey encapsulates all these complexities: the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre ways humanity moved goods across the seas. The Nanking cargo wasn't special when it left Canton in 1753. Just another East Indiaman packed with tea, porcelain, and silk. But its journey became a perfect snapshot of maritime trade at its peak. The ship's manifest lists 1,022 chests of bohea tea, 89 crates of blue and white porcelain, and 56 bales of Nanking silk ordinary goods for the China trade. What made this voyage remarkable wasn't the cargo, but how it moved through the world. The crew roster reads like a UN assembly. The captain was a Scotsman who'd sailed for the Swedish East India Company before defecting to the British. His first mate was a mixed-race Portuguese from Macau, who spoke 5 languages poorly, but fluently enough to curse in all of them. The ship's surgeon was a Frenchman who'd studied in Leiden and practiced in Batavia before signing on. Among the 120 sailors were Malays, Africans, and at least one Native American listed as Joseph the Mohawk. They communicated in a pidgin of Portuguese, Malay, and sailor slang that confused every port official they met. Their route zigzagged according to markets and threats. The Nanking left Canton in January to catch the northeast monsoon, but instead of heading straight for Europe, it detoured to Manila. Spanish silver bought they would fetch better rates in India. From the Philippines, they sailed to Pondicherry, where French traders paid a premium for Chinese porcelain to resell in Persia. The ship's log notes stopping at Johor to repair leaks, then getting chased by pirates near Ceylon before reaching Bombay. Every leg adjusted for winds, prices, and rumors of war. The cargo transformed at each stop. In India, they traded some. Silver for opium, not for Europe, but for the Indonesian market. At Cape Town, they swapped Chinese porcelain for wine and fresh provisions, then sold half the wine in St. Helena for letters of credit. By the time they reached London, only 600 original tea chests remained. The rest had been traded for more profitable items along the way. Customs inspectors groaned at the mixed manifests assessing. Duties required untangling months of mid-ocean barters. Dangers stacked up like storm clouds. The ship survived a hurricane off Madagascar by jettisoning 20 crates of porcelain. The captain's journal notes they were third-rate wares anyway. Malaria killed 11 crew members in Batavia, despite the surgeon's stock of Jesuit bark. Pirates near Mauritius got a chest of pepper as toll after the crew pretended. The rest was worthless cotton. The closest call came in the English Channel. A French privateer nearly seized them, only backing off when the Scottish captain produced fake Swedish papers. What the Nanking carried mattered less than what it connected. Its tea ended up in Boston. Silver pots, its opium in Javanese longhouses. The porcelain graced Dutch merchant homes and English country manors. Even the ship itself became part of the trade after unloading in London. It was sold to a Norwegian firm for the Baltic timber. Run, the same hull that carried Ming Dynasty artistry later, transported Swedish pine to Egypt, that the crew scattered just as widely. The Mohawk sailor jumped ship in New York, later appearing in records as a Hudson River pilot. The Portuguese mate settled in Macau as a freelance trade consultant, read smuggler. The French surgeon opened a Batavia clinic catering to European sailors. His account book lists treatments, ranging from mercury doses for syphilis to pulling teeth with modified ship's pliers. Only the Scottish captain disappeared from records entirely, possibly retiring under a false name to avoid creditors. This single voyage reshaped economies in small, lasting ways. The Nanking's tea shipment helped glut the London market, dropping prices just as the East India Company needed them high. Their side trade in Indian opium to Java undercut Dutch monopolies, fueling a smuggling war that lasted decades. Even the porcelain mattered. Those surviving pieces became heirlooms that sparked European ceramic innovations. One Staffordshire potter's notebook from 1762 sketches designs copied from a Nanking blue bowl. The human exchanges left deeper marks. The pidgin language the crew invented became the basis for Chinese pidgin English, used for generations. The Malay cook who jumped ship in Cape Town started a dockside food stall selling curry made with Indian spices, possibly introducing curry to South Africa. A letter from a Boston merchant mentions hiring a Chinaman from a Swedish ship to advise on tea blends, likely one of the Nanking's crew. What makes this voyage special is how ordinary it was. Hundreds of ships followed similar routes each year, each creating its own web of consequences. The Nanking didn't change history through any single dramatic act, but through the accumulated weight of countless small transactions. Its real cargo wasn't tea or porcelain, but connections between people, markets, and ideas that had no business meeting, but did anyway, because the sea routes made it possible. The ship itself ended ignobly. After 12 years of service under 4 flags, it ran aground near Bergen while carrying Russian hemp. The Norwegian owners declared it not worth the salvaging. Local farmers stripped its timbers for barn repairs within weeks. No plaque marks its resting place, just some rotted wood in a fjord that occasionally coughs up Chinese porcelain shards after storms. From this single unremarkable ship's journey, we can trace how the slow movement of goods across oceans quietly built the world we know today. Those slow boats carried more than cargo. They hauled the blueprint of our modern world in their creaking holds. Next time you sip tea, check the tag. That orange Pico spent longer getting to England than it took to build the pyramids. Your cotton shirt? Its ancestors crossed oceans at walking speed, passing through a dozen hands before reaching any loom knot. We think of globalization as new, but those ancient sailors knew better. Their voyages stitched together cultures long before airplanes or internet. Cables. The real trade wasn't just goods, It was ideas, failures, and accidental connections, Dot. So tonight, let the sound of waves remind you. Those sleepy merchant routes still shape what's in your cupboard, your closet, even your DNA. Maybe. It's not such a small world after all, just one that took centuries to collide. Sweet dreams of ancient horizons.